and welcome to the Drexel interview. I'm your host, Paula Marantz Cohen, speaking to you from the Drexel Picture Gallery. This is part 2 of our interview with producer and writer Chuck Barris. Chuck Barris was one of the early masterminds behind the TV game show. He created or produced some 20 TV shows, including most notably The Dating Game, The Newlywed Game, Treasure Hunt, and The Gong Show. In addition to working in television, he's been a songwriter and a writer. In the first half of our show, we talked about Chuck's television career. In this part, we'll discuss his life and work outside of television. Chuck Barris, welcome back to the Drexel interview.
Good to be back, Paula.
Well, I want to start by talking about your early writing on the student newspaper, The Triangle, which is Drexel's newspaper, and we're here at Drexel, your alma mater. And I guess that was the beginning of your writing career, would you say so? I mean, you certainly had a profile, it seems, on that newspaper. You signed yourself Sloppy Chuck Barris, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I guess, yeah, I guess that's all true because it's there in print. But I don't know why I
You have no recollection?
I have no recollection unless I just like to be called Sloppy Chuck Barris. But I don't know why I did that. And I wrote a column that I got a big kick out of, but I'm not sure everybody else got a big kick out of it.
Do you remember writing it?
I do.
You do?
I think that I do.
Here's one example. The column seems to have been called "Let's Face It."
Yeah.
And one of the columns is titled "Get With It, Mother, Tell Daughter the Truth." And in it you have a little exchange, made-up exchange between mother and daughter. Mother, Rebecca dear, how old are you? Rebecca, why mother, you are doubtless aware that I am a young maiden of 18 summers, still a rose unfurled in the midst of the garden of life. A rose unfurled. Do you remember writing that?
Not at all.
Well,
but
it struck me as an amusing voice.
It sounds pretty good, I think. I can't believe that this was what I did in those days. I mean, writing this column and then going on to be a writer. That's kind of amazing.
You mean because there was this chunk of time in between?
Huge. I mean, I went off in a totally different direction and then eventually came back to it. And
you wouldn't have imagined, I guess, that would have been what you would have come back to at the time you were working in television?
Not in a million years. I just think that's kind of wonderful. I would have liked to read my old columns.
Well, I'm sure we can get them for you. Well, actually, though, I mean, your first career, in a sense, might have been as a songwriter because you did have a hit song, Palisades Park, and then you also wrote some of the songs for your game shows.
Yes, but I wrote Palisades Park, but I couldn't read music. I hummed the song into a tape recorder and sent it out to some singers that I knew, and the song would have been it was supposed to be the B-side of a record. The A-side was never heard of again, and the B-side became a hit. It was number 2 in the country, but. I couldn't become a songwriter because I really couldn't read music. So I was called on the carpet for writing that song by ABC television, and they fired me because it was at a very sensitive time when that song came out, and I got down on my knees. I actually got down on my knee in front of this general counsel of the American Broadcasting Company and begged him not to fire me. I don't know anything else.
Why did they fire you for writing a hit song?
Well, the song, it was during the payola scandals. And the song, and Dick Clark, who previous to that time.
This is the quiz show scandals?
No, there was a different scandal. It was money being paid to disc jockeys and people who ran television shows to get their record played on the air, and a lot of the money was going to these people. And Dick Clark, who I was originally the spy, or I was sent down by the network to watch him. We the two of us knew the sensitivity of the situation and refused to play Palisades Park on Bandstand until it was in the top 10 of the country. And I saw nothing wrong once the song was in the top 10 being played on Bandstand. So that's what got me into trouble, and that's when I begged to stay into television, and he let me stay in, thank goodness, because I couldn't read music, so what was I doing?
So you were never really serious about being a songwriter. I mean, it was a fluke in a sense that you wrote that song and that it was so popular?
Well, no, I could have written some other songs. I did write another song, but I've written a few other songs, but they never had the magnitude of Palisades Park, and I just. But when I heard Palisades Park on the radio, I just went nuts. I mean, I had to pull the car over the side of the road and just listen to it.
Yeah, it must have been exciting.
It was very exciting.
Well, then came your whole stint in television. And then in the 1980s, you left television, the whole industry behind, and you moved to the south of France. Now, I guess my first question, because that's where you began to write, why the south of France?
Well, I had two very close friends that lived in the south of France, Larry Collins, who wrote, and Dominique Lapierre. The two of them wrote a number of bestsellers, great books and I just loved the style in which they were writing. They would go down and have coffee in the port of Saint-Tropez, then go back up and spend the mornings writing. And I would go over to their house and I'd hear the typewriters going, and it just seemed to me like the most wonderful way of life I had ever seen. They wrote as Paris Burning, those two, and all sorts of
So it inspired
books.
you, in a sense, for the lifestyle.
The lifestyle seemed incredible. So I just sold my company. I had a lot of money, and I went to the south of France, and I bought a house overlooking the Mediterranean, and I started writing.
That sounds wonderful.
It was absolutely wonderful.
So, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind,
No,
what was the first book you wrote then?
The first book I wrote in Saint-Tropez while I was running my company. It was a book called You and Me, Babe, and it became a bestseller.
It was a love story.
This was a love story. It was a bestseller. It went to number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list, and I thought that was the most wonderful thing that ever happened to me. It was really not that great an omen, because the next 3 or 4 books I wrote, nothing happened, and they were just...
So you began to realize what the publishing industry was like.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
But then you did have another success.
Yes, I did.
With your unauthorized autobiography,
Yeah,
Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. And that, of course, is a very controversial book in which you say that you worked as a hitman for the CIA during the time that you were working in television.
That's right.
Okay, and of course you were pulling our leg.
No, I wasn't. But
You're such a sensitive soul.
How could I go around shooting people?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's strange. But I'll never say whether I was or wasn't.
Because it would spoil it.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
But when the Confessions of a Dangerous Mind came out, it was published the first time by St. Martin's Press. And Tom McCormick was the head of St. Martin's Press. He loved the book, and he published 100,000.
Wow.
And in those days, which was 1970, I believe. No, 1970 I wrote You and Me, Babe. 1980. 100,000 books was a lot of books. and it sold 7,000 copies. So there was 93,000 remainders, which I have most of in a basement of my house.
But they must have sold later after the movie came out.
Those books never sold, but the book came out later, published by Miramax, and who made the movie, and that book
sold well. Well, the movie, of course, which is very well known, was directed by George Clooney and written by Charlie Kaufman,
right,
who also wrote Adaptation, another movie that I like a lot. What did you think of the movie? What did you think of the screenplay, and what did you think of the movie?
Well, I thought the book was better. I thought that the screenplay was very hectic for the book, and I wasn't thrilled with it.
Were you consulted at all? Were you involved at all in the process?
George was terrific with me. He let me come up to Montreal. It was filmed in Montreal, to watch anything I wanted to watch. I was happily led onto the set. He asked me a few questions, not many, and then and that was about it. But
I mean, it was a star-studded cast.
Yes,
Julia Roberts was in it, and Brad Pitt, and George Clooney, and and it was a big hit. So I mean, I'm sure that you had celebrity already, and I'm sure when that movie came out, it
was
doubled
a second coming. That part was incredible. I never had so much publicity, but I guess that's what happens when you write a book that's made into a movie.
Right. But also, of course, the mystique that you had created around yourself, the notion, which was really brilliant when you think about it. It sort of reminds me of your game shows. I mean, you were staging yourself in a way. And as this hit, I mean, it was just guaranteed to arouse a certain kind of interest. And, I mean, were you very self-consciously doing this? I mean,
well, it took a certain amount of something.
Chutzpah?
Chutzpah is great. That's exactly what it took. I mean, people from the CIA. The wonderful thing about being in the CIA is that they never reveal who is in the CIA. So you're kind of protected that way. Journalists during that time went often to the CIA, and they asked members of the CIA if I in fact was a member of the CIA, and one of them said, "Listen, he's been standing too close to his gong. He can't possibly, and so forth and so on." But
well, the beauty of it is that any denial, the more forcefully they deny it, the more it may be true, right?
I suppose.
So I think you're in a perfect position. It's very tantalizing, I guess. Then you wrote a sequel to that book.
Yeah.
Bad Grass
Never
Dies.
Dies.
Do you have anything particular you want to tell us about that book? Was it hard to write? Did you feel compelled to write a sequel? Were you asked to wite one after the success of this book?
They came to me, a gentleman named Jonathan Burnham, who was editor-in-chief at Miramax, came to me and asked me to write a sequel. And so I wrote this Bad Grass Never Dies, which, I did because he asked me to do it. And when I brought it to him, he rejected it and didn't think it was, a real sequel. I didn't